I think he's the best and most complete freshman Duke's ever had. And he'll be the number one pick. He's special. And he's got an aptitude for the game that you don't see very often. He's at a competitive level. Competitive character is a lot like Christian Laettner's, frankly. He processes the game on a different level than most players. And he's super skilled, super athletic, long. He's got all the measurables, but it's the head and heart that set him apart.
Thank you for joining me. If this is your first time here, I would like to say thank you for joining and learning a little bit more about what we do over here at Step Back Jays. You clicked on this video, I'm pretty sure you know why you're here. It's the Cooper Flagg Sweepstakes, and trying to make sense of it, of what it means for every lottery-bound team. With that in mind, there's 13 teams vying for that opportunity, and there's only one guy that they could choose as the number one pick. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun to talk about this, and hopefully you enjoy my little thing that I put together here to go over and dissect each aspect of the lottery, what it means for the specific team, and how I think they could capitalize off if they were given the opportunity of choosing one Cooper Flagg.
Curry steps back. Bang! They do have a timeout. Decide not to use it. Curry way downtown. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry!
All right. So as I start with this, I'm just going to go over the list of teams that do have this opportunity right now this year to get in the Cooper Flagg sweepstake. So let's start with the obvious ones. You have Utah, Washington, Charlotte, New Orleans leading up the top four in best odds. And then you have Philadelphia, Brooklyn, Toronto, San Antonio. A leveled out odds, but still kind of a little bit more of a far-fetched for them to reach this. And then you have the guys where it's kind of going to be a little bit of a far reach to reach this. That is Houston, Portland, Dallas, Chicago, Atlanta, and San Antonio. But although those are a far reach, it's still an opportunity or a chance that they can get this. So I broke down each one of these teams. I've created a couple subgroups so it's easier to digest, and then I'll clip up this video for you to go through each one of these groups. The first group with the shortest odds is the late to the Coop party group. As I mentioned, these are guys with the most reduced opportunity or odds to potentially get in on this. And then we have the could happen but not likely group, and then we have in that next group the got a good shot but still a long shot, and then lastly rounding out the big three. So with all that said, let's get right into it. I'm going to start off by going over some facts I just pulled together about the lottery, and as we go into this every year, we always think about the opportunity or the chance that, hey, they rigged the lottery. It's not in my team's favor, but I learned a lot in this opportunity and this time while I'm creating this video for you guys to dissect a little bit why even the lottery is a thing, and then why even the seedings got to this point. So with that in mind, the league was attempting to counter accusations that certain teams were purposely losing in order to gain a chance to participate in the annual coin flip. So before pre-1985, they literally took a coin and flipped it. The worst two teams in each division at that time. And then in 1971, I believe, there was a change when the conferences became, so they started to do it coin flip with the two worst teams in each conference. Then that resulted in who would get the first pick in the upcoming draft. So funny to be a little bit of a full circle moment now, is now we sit and we look at the lottery and we kind of think it's a little antiquated in how it's done. And, in recent years, I think it was 2019, they did shorten the odds of the top three. So that's made it a little bit more competitive, but it still hence has its ups and downs. But if you don't know about the lottery, I'll give you a little bit more of an understanding of how this breakdown happens. Each one of these teams, what that looks like for each one of them. So the lottery, as I mentioned, was implemented in 1985. The structure of what it was upheld until 2018. The worst team would receive 250 combination of balls, which would give them 25% of the odds. The second worst team would get 199. That would give them a 19.99 odds. And then the third worst would get 156, which would be 15.6 odds, and so on. First three picks determined in that way. But as I mentioned before, in 2019, this changed a little bit. The three worst teams now have an equal chance at that first pick with 14% of the odds. And then the fourth worst team has a 12.5 percentage odd. And then from there, it downscales. So those first three teams, very important, as I mentioned, have an equal chance at winning the lottery. But it does not mean that curving the odds in that way has opened the opportunity, much like we saw last year with Zachary Reese-Deshay going as the number one pick, is you could be in the play-in and you could be the lucky team that gets to choose on Cooper Flagg. One more stat I wanted to leave you guys with as we take a look at the lottery, close this out, is teams that have selected here. You'll hear as I mentioned with Charlotte, there's some teams that are perennially here. So I wanted to also let you guys know, well, then who is the team that have the most selections? And this one was actually a funny one to do some research on, was the teams with the most lottery selections. The creation of the lottery are the Clippers and the Magics. Although they both had 4 selections, they both decided to trade one of those selections. In the Magic's case, it was a draft day trade, as I mentioned before, to move off of Memphis guard Penny Hardaway in exchange for number one pick Chris Webber. And whereas the Clippers was a little more unexcusable, as they moved their pick during the season for Mo Williams and Jamario Moon in exchange for Baron Davis and, just a pick that they thought would just be, a middle of the pack lottery pick that wound up becoming Kyrie Irving. So as I go through each one of the picks, and this time I'm going to go a little bit with the facts of each one of these teams and where they're selecting, and the facts around that specific pick, and go from there. So as I mentioned, we'll go from the least likely odds all the way to the best odds and break it down a little bit. I have a breakdown for each one of these teams too, about where they stand on a short and long-term basis. And then I have a future index that I created that is using the criteria of where their current roster sits at, their future picks, and then their front office, where they're standing as well. So as I mentioned, the late to the Coop party group, the shortest odds, these odds are the teams of the 14th, 13th, and 12th lottery position. No one, unfortunately, in this range has ever won the lottery. Maybe that changed this year. Who knows? So that first team, which is actually a pick that has been traded over to San Antonio, it's coming via Atlanta, but it's going to San Antonio. This is the 14th pick. This is heading, like I said, to San Antonio. For me, my future index, I'll just go with that off the bat. It's an A+. You look at this roster in San Antonio, I don't think I need to really explain why I feel that way, but I'm sure you'll hear it in my short-term and long-term goals for this team. But I'm giving them an A+. They're the cream of the crops of what we're looking for, looking towards the future. They have 6 first-round picks, including this year's. In the next 5 years, they have about 12 second-round picks in the next 5 years as well. So, as I mentioned, the whole purpose of this video is understanding what Coop would mean to that specific team. I think it's easy. In the short term, instant finals contenders in my mind. it creates a formidable roster developing around the recently selected Rookie of the Year, Steven Castle, Wemby, and then Coop. And then you have a boatload of assets to strengthen this team. That gives you a lot of flexibility for the short term and the long term. And I'll get in more detail about the long term, but I'll start off with the short term. In the short term, like I said, instant finals contender in my mind. I think that they've put enough, and I put so much weight in bringing in a guy over the trade deadline like a De'Aaron Fox to this team that ultimately can be the difference of if you don't pick up a guy like that, could have been the difference of if they're just next year a play-in team or if they're a playoff team. Now you're talking about bringing in a guy like Cooper Flagg into the fold of that. That almost already has solidified the lineup. And then you take a look at guys like Devin Vassell. You look at guys like you take a guy like and I'm drawing a blank on his name right now. You take a look at a guy like Keldon Johnson on this roster, Devin Vassell, as I mentioned, and then even Jeremy Sochan. I think that slots Jeremy Sochan to be one of the guys coming off the bench and bringing that energy. Those last couple of years of him being a playmaker, I think has helped. Yeah, when I look at all of the young pieces together, how they've built this team out, it really does look like a team that could easily vie for the finals in my mind. And that's why I think that their short term looks completely beautiful in my mind. Long term, I'm looking at how the potential big three matures together. What Coop's game, he's going to demand the ball more. And I wonder how that affects someone like a Castle. I do think that Coop's game has been really well off ball as well. So there may be a mix. There'll be a little bit of on ball, off ball, but I don't know. I think that his game is going to ask for more usage in the NBA, and I wonder how that affects the situation with a guy like Castle if he's selected. So there's that, and then I wonder, does he regress as a defender, knowing that he has like the ultimate safety blanket down low with the defensive player of the year? In my mind, if he stayed healthy, it would have been him, but I'll just say at this moment, candidate Wemby. Either way, doesn't take away from what would possibly be the scariest lineup in my mind. And I think the only team that would rival them would be the Thunder at that case. So I'll say this too, just to save me the time as well, because San Antonio, luckily, have 2 picks in this lottery. So lucky for them, right? They also have, I believe it is the 8th pick, and that puts them in the group of could happen but not likely group. So I'll just bundle that together and just say, hey, like same thing that I just mentioned. They just have a better odds of it happening at the 8th spot. The 8th spot, I think they have a 6% chance of winning the lottery there. So yeah, kudos to the roster that they've built, the future assets they've put together, and then the brilliance of this front office is what Coop would be walking right into. And honestly, that would, if I'm being honest, would lead to a dynasty. All right, moving on to the next team. That team is the Atlanta Hawks. They are picking via a Sacramento Kings pick. Their pick odds is 0.8%. When I look at the future index for them, I gave them a C-. Yeah, it really comes down to it for me with Atlanta. This is a team that I can't say that I 100% trust their front office at this moment. They do have nice pieces, and I'll go over that in my short and long-term plans if they receive Coop. But I just don't feel comfortable with that. And then even their assets, future assets, it's very middle of the pack when you look at it. So I'm not too high on where they are for their future, but I'll just go over where they are with their picks. They have about 6 first-round picks in the last 5 years. So it's above average, right? You're getting a little bit more than 1 year you get 2 picks in a draft. So that's good. And then you have 2 second-round picks in the next 5 years. that doesn't really bode too well, especially because I see second round picks more as like a tradable asset in that way. So there's that. But as I think about this in the Coop Flagg sense, does this really mean in the short term? It's a redemption tour for Trae Young in my mind. Ultimately, Trae Young gets the first time in his career he'll be paired with someone that has the potential to be an all-star. Then we can really have the open dialogue about the Trae Young experience in Atlanta. Obviously, in recent years, it's been talked about how we don't believe he has adequate support. But me personally, I think I would beg that now you have a guy like Dyson Daniels, you have Zachary Reese-Shea coming into his fold on this roster. He may potentially have a better constructed team right now that is maturing around him in his career than earlier in his career. But nonetheless, you insert Coop into that takes the team to another level. It unlocks this roster. It's just, I don't love the collection of picks that they have right now. So I wonder, how do they strengthen this roster with that in mind in the short term? Now, long term, I think it's similar in my concerns with the short term is right now I just don't believe in the Hawks front office. They recently fired their GM, Landry Fields, and this makes me very fearful that they would not construct a team year over year that would not or does not sacrifice their future assets. They've already done it with the team that we talked about just before was who they did it with. And I'm scared for Coop being in a situation like this because ultimately it just screams to me that it could potentially be like a 2003 to 2010 Cleveland Cavaliers era like situation if he's there long term. Currently, they have a lot of outgoing draft picks and they don't have a lot of incoming picks. And, I think anyone could convince themselves it's a positive because you have Coop coming to the roster. So that will make the team look a lot more positive. And then you have a guy like Trae Young, but you just don't know if Trae Young wants to stay here long term. He's had his time here. It's his choice at that point. But it puts me right in that situation of why I said like 2003, 2010 Cleveland Cavaliers, very similar. You have on the way out when LeBron was coming in, you had Carlos Boozer that head out. Think about if LeBron even got a couple seasons with Carlos Boozer and him to play in Cleveland, like what that would have looked like. And that's my fear that I see here too, is you just don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty of the situation with Trae, but thank God they still have Dyson Daniels and they still have Zachary Reese-Shea to develop around Coop if they were lucky to select him. Our next team I've talked about, and it's so funny how this area ranges. I have the team that I think has the best future index, and then I have the team that is the middle of the pack, and I bring up the last team in this group that I personally believe had the worst future index, and it is the Chicago Bulls. They have a 1.7% pick odds here. They have about 6 picks in the next 5 years. So, again, a little bit above average. Only 3 second-round picks in the next 5 years. But I will digest why. They take the cake as the worst future in my mind. First, it starts off with that front office. It's not something – it has not looked really good with that front office for a while, and it just makes me very scared for any future pick. It makes me scared for any potential young star coming to this team. So, yeah, that aspect of it, they don't have a lot of picks. The roster, when I look at the roster, not the best constructed one. There's a lot of pieces where you could see, hey, in a year, this might be a piece that gets traded. This is a piece that you don't know where they stand. Is it hard to get off this contract? And then there was a lot of time in between where Chicago was really in the in-between phase. Like, you didn't know if they wanted to rebuild. You didn't know if they wanted to tank, right? And I think it was Brian Windhorst that said this on the Basketball Collective, is that there's nothing worse than a team that doesn't know that they're in a rebuild. And clearly Chicago has been moving like a team that did not know they're in a rebuild, and this is why I give them the worst future index. So I'll speak on the short term of if they add Coop. Pretty harsh, I'm not going to lie. But I said, honestly, nothing, to be honest. I don't think anything. I don't think it means anything, to be honest. I just don't think that this roster is strong enough to do much with or without Coop. Although I do love what Josh Giddey brings to this team, he is a restricted free agent. Someone could decide to throw money at him. And if he does decide, if it's a crazy bag toss and there's crazy implications and incentives in there and he doesn't come back, I mean, it looks very bleak. I think at that point they're just going to sign whatever and accept it. But like I'm just like not very hopeful for this team, even if that's the case. But there is a bright side. He's been literally the bright side for this team the last 2 years. It's Kobe White. So if you still got him and Kobe White, maybe bring back Josh Giddey, I don't think that screams playoff contention, even to me, in a situation where you're in the Eastern Conference. So it gives me more of a little bit of the same of what they're already continuing to do, and that's play in contention for the short term. Now, for the long term, I weigh heavily in the long term your front office, right? So I like long term that they control a lot of their own future assets, which will help them in strengthening this roster if they were able to get Coop. But once again, I just don't trust this front office. As a baseball fan as well, I am pretty familiar with what the Reinsdorfs have been doing with the White Sox. They also own the White Sox. And it's making me increasingly more uncomfortable with the fact that they have their fingers on the pulse of the basketball operations over here. A lot of the time they look, because he was owning since when MJ was there, but you had a lot of Jerry Krause to save the day with that. But ever since Jerry Krause has not been a part of this organization, I mean, they've lucked into some situations. They've had competent guys in there, but it has not looked as good since then. So it makes me fearful when you hear that Jerry's son serves in the role of basketball operations. It's even more telling when you have a GM in Mark Eversley that's been on the team for the last 20 years, and he's probably the least visible GM in the league. I have not heard direct quotes about how they're going to change their outlook on what's going on. As I was doing research, came up on a podcast. I'm going to clip their information into here just to give them a shout out. But they were one of the people that I got my research from, and they were talking about how it makes sense. Like, Billy Donovan got his extension. You could convince yourself why that happened, right? He was able to bring the team to the playoffs. But Mark, in this situation, just does not seem, there's no reason. There's nothing of note, of honor that he's done in these last couple of years to get an extension. But very well in this recent years, he was granted an extension, a 3-year extension. So arguably, you get an extension in arguably one of the most mismanaged periods in like Bulls basketball. That doesn't make me happy with like where the long-term future looks for this team. But, maybe adding Coop remedies some of that. And, if you're a Bulls fan, one can hope, So I'll move on. All right. So as I said, this next group is the could happen but not likely group. So our next team in this group is the Dallas Mavericks. This is where it gets a little interesting. I'll give you a little bit of some pick facts as we move along, as this is where teams have actually gotten a number one pick from these slots. At the 11th lottery pick, there has been a team that has won the lottery from this place, although very unlikely. That very pick was Chris Webber in 1993. Although the pick was with the Magic and he was selected at this pick, like I said, Chris Webber, they actually gave up this in a trade to get Penny Hardaway instead to pair with Shaq. I can only imagine what that would have looked like if Shaq and Webber were able to play together. It's crazy to try to wrap that around your mind, but also understand how great Shaq and Penny were together during this period as well. But as I mentioned, this is where Dallas is picking at this 11th overall pick, at this 11th pick selection. They have a 1.8% pick odds here. I actually gave them a B+ in their future index, and I know there might be some people, some angry pitchforks in my comments after this one, but I'll give the reasons why. So a lot of it is weighing on roster. The current roster is really fleshed out. They have everything you would want on a formidable team, they have, right? It is health that is their biggest what if with this team. But when you think of that, it's every team has that. And as we see in this playoffs currently, it's a war of attrition. So that's why I weigh heavily on their roster. I'll put it as this now. Everybody is pretty sour on this guy right now, Nico Harrison. Rightfully so. There's no world where what he did made sense to anyone. But also, he is the guy that's constructed this well-constructed roster. He's the mad chemist, right? Like, that's what it's starting to feel like. We have to see what he really cooked up and see if it makes sense. But as of right now, not really a lot of confidence in that front office right now. And then they have very middle-of-the-pack situation with their picks because they only have 5 of their necks in this next year, and they're all first round picks. So that's kind of a little scary when you look at it, the deeper, longer future, but I'll get to that as we weigh out everything. But thinking about it in the short term, this is the second team that I'll say instant finals contender in my mind. The world's biggest if right here, if Kyrie decides to re-sign, and that's not really a foregone conclusion in my mind at this point currently, because Kyrie is going to be a free agent this year. I know he has the torn ACL. I believe it was a torn ACL. I will make sure that that's right. But if it's not, you'll see it right somewhere like here if it's something else. But, it's not a foregone conclusion that he's going to re-sign. And now you weigh out if he does re-sign, I don't think that there's a lot of other teams that are better constructed for Coop in this lottery situation. He'll have a good balance of ability to learn and also develop into the star player we believe he could become in this opportunity. And then we've clearly seen it. You've seen it by how the fans are embraced Luka and embraced Dirk too during his time. Dallas is a perfect place to be a star player. So I just, if he does wind up here, I think that it's a great opportunity for him to be, if he is actually selected to go to Dallas. All right, so long term, now the fact that the stars of these teams are typically injury prone, and it's safe to say, honestly, they're closer to the end of their careers than the beginning. And, with both of them being in the league well over 10 years at this point, I do have concerns outside of a 3-year window of what that roster would be. And ultimately, it puts pressure on Coop to develop quickly. And we really don't know how he'll handle that, right? So the pressure could ultimately lead to him pressing hard on his development, or ultimately he could lean into a situation similar to Jason Tatum, where he's emboldened by it, right? And he embraces it and he grows within the role. But, ironically, for both guys that I just mentioned, they both had Kyrie on their side during that time. So if that is the case, I don't know. I feel very confident that he'll lean towards the side of figuring it out, in my mind. So the next team on this list is the Portland Trail Blazers. They have the 10th lottery pick selection. The lottery has been won at this place once. It was actually last year, and it was the Atlanta Hawks who were present in the play-in, but they still won the first pick. And that selection was Zachary Risache last year. So the pick odds at this selection is 3.7%. So again, this is another team where I tried to be very objective with the scoring of my future index. And this is one of those that kind of like it went again. I'm going to say stuff that goes against the future index that I created, but I am going to still stand by the score here. But I'm going to give Portland a D-. They have 4 first-round picks in the next 5 years, which is below average. And then they have 6 second-round picks and then over the next 5 years. So like I said, a lot to tradable assets. You can always pick a guy at those selections as well, too. But in the short term, and why I got to the point of why I feel they got a D- is in the short term, I will illustrate the good. In the long term, you're going to start hearing the bad. But ultimately, I think that this score was highly built around the front office. The front office, looking at the current roster at this present moment, although middle of the pack picks to choose from our pick selection, but it all just bodes to me that it's not the brightest future, and that kind of is why they got the score that they got. So in the short term, I think this, if you add Coop to this team, it leads them into the play-in. Right, I'm really high. This is the positive on them, is I'm really high on their coaching. I think that this team being led by Chauncey Billups, man, last year how they finished out the season, they completely outplayed their roster capability. Yes, you have guys like Scoot on that team that's playing a lot better this year than he did last year, but I believe that they fully bought into Billups' defensive prowess that he was trying to implement into this team, and that, you know, they're destined to break out when you look at what they've been doing. And you go to the point of they were in contention and they were going for it with the play-in without Cooper Flagg. So in my mind, I think that it's almost, if they got Coop, it's a foregone conclusion that they would be able to achieve that. So now some more positives to that is I believe adding Coop would be a paramount in the efforts for their team. In the short term, because, you know, they do not have a lot, but they have a decent chunk of tradable picks. And they have a ton of team-friendly contracts. So I think they could find themselves in a very interesting position considering all of those things. I also believe that Coop in this situation is exactly what any coach would want, but this is exactly what a coach like Billups would dream of. A star player of that caliber that would seamlessly buy into the program. Once you have a star player that's playing like that, I mean, it's easier for the guys underneath him to buy in. You see it with Cade. You see it with guys like Paolo. I mean, I feel like he falls right into that same fold once he comes into the league. It's easy to say that, too, with a guy like Paolo, similar pedigree from college. One of the biggest things you could say about these Duke guys, they do really well once they make it onto the big stage. And this is a show of that. Now for a long term, right, so Joe Cronin, he is what scares me long term about this team. He's been very, 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 very quiet as a GM in the sense of movement. Yes, they've had some trades over the periods that he's been there, but I don't think that they were the aggressors, right? Like, I don't think that they initiated trades that wind up shaping out this team. So getting assets around the squad, I just don't know. I don't think it's too much to be concerned if you're a Trailblazers fan, but I would be a little bit concerned with the fact he's not doing enough to put a ton of assets around this team. But like I said, with having a good chunk of picks, depending on how he moves those picks, they could be fine, They do have a ton of outgoing picks in the next 5 years, so that's another reason why I'm pretty negative for the future. But luckily, they recuperated a ton back in trades like the Drew Holiday trade. And granted, a ton of them are second-round picks, but it is still stuff that they could move around and get more solid players on the roster if Coop was selected to be on their team. All right, moving on to the next team. As of right when I'm recording right now, I think it is Sunday, May 4th when I'm recording this. Houston is still in the playoffs. Who knows if they will still be in the playoffs, but guess what? They found their way into the draft lottery. They will be selecting at the 9th. They have the 9th best lottery odds via the Phoenix Suns. Teams with the 9th best odds have won twice. That is a 3.8% odds. Those two teams were the Cleveland Cavaliers in 2014, the most recent one, selecting Andrew Wiggins, which they traded to the T-Wolves. And then in 2008, Chicago was selected to pick Derrick Rose. This team, I think it's pretty easy to know where they stand in their future index. As I said, they are in the playoffs, and they have a pick right here, is that they have an A- score for me. In the next 5 years, they have 5 first-round picks right up to par, and then 6 second-round picks to choose from as well. So clearly, they have a boatload of assets to build around a team that is already good enough to be second in the West. So what Coop means for this team specifically in the short term, instant contender, a team that currently at this time, as I mentioned, is in the playoffs. You look at what Ime Udoka as a coach, as one of the most premier coaches in our league at this time, gives them. He's got this team playing very, very well. They completely bought in on the defensive side of the ball, good enough to get to the 4th best defensive odds this season. But the one criticism, and it's the one criticism that is happening even in this playoff series right now, but that's not the conversation, is they have a very middle-of-the-pack offense, right? Although they have Jalen, they have Şengün, it seems to be that they're looking for a true 1A for this team. Maybe Coop is that guy, but I really do think that if he was selected here, he joins a team that allows for him to fit right into that role, and it would be seamless in my mind. So long term, it bodes well as well. Picks that they have allocated to go, that they've already allocated to go for a big swing this offseason for guys like Ja Morant, Kevin Durant, and even Giannis. If you get Coop, all of that changes. You can take those picks and be completely flexible with what you do with it. You have the flexibility to shore up this bench and move some of the players on this team like a Reed Shepherd. Sadly, he's just not getting the minutes he's going to be deserving of on this team. So maybe you move him with the promise of getting someone on another team that is looking for that young guy to revitalize their team, and you get more high-impact players for now and later. And ultimately, Coop gives them that flexibility, that option to have that. It gives them that option to be completely flexible with your future when weighing out multiple options moving forward. So we will skip past the 8 odds, as I mentioned, because that was San Antonio. And that brings us to the got a good shot, but a long shot group of teams. This is where it gets a little interesting. It gets a little fun here. We're going to start off with Toronto. Toronto has the 7th best odds in this lottery. The 7th best odds has won 3 times in the lottery's history. The most noteworthy being 2019 with Zion Williamson going to the Pelicans, 2000 Kenyon Martin going to New Jersey, and in 2007 the Trailblazers selecting Greg Oden. This gives you a 7.5% picks odds. For my future index, I gave the Toronto Raptors a C. When you look at what Toronto is, you still have a lot of faith in their front office. I'll go into that in my short and long-term outlook with them if they were able to select Cooper Flagg. But you have a lot of faith in what that front office still is. A lot of questionable things has happened in the last couple of years, so granted. But they have a decent roster, and then they have some assets. You look at where they stand. They have 5 first-round picks in the next 5 years, so right at par. And then they have 5 second-round picks in the next 5 years. So, it's easy to see why they got a C in my mind. They're right in the middle. It's just an average future looking at it right now. So when you look at the short term, I think this brings them back into playoff contention. I believe it would be, I believe it would take a little bit of a shuffle, but this team, especially because they're in the East, could easily be in playoff contention as soon as next year. They have a decent collection of picks. I believe that this gives them flexibility to move things around, especially when you look at how this team is constructed right now. I mean, you add Coop, my mind turns to R.J. Barrett, Grady Dick. Are these guys expendable to you? Do you look to shore up other positions like the guard position or the bigs position when you're looking toward this team for the short term? And then now you're looking at the long term. I mean, you believe in the track record of the Raptors front office. They've been real good. In recent years, it's been a little questionable, but I'll use one example is they waited around and on when to sell on Pascal Siakam, which initiated the whole rebuilding, retooling, whatever they want to call it, right, that they're in the middle of right now, that led to getting a less favorable package for him when he was outgoing to Indiana, But nonetheless, I still trust this team in the long term because of Masai Ujiri. He's always been one that you could say takes a well-calculated but aggressive move, much like the bold trade he just did with Brandon Ingram during this season. It just goes to show, he's willing to take that swing when it makes sense. So I also love that you have a former Rookie of the Year in Scotty Barnes on this team, and being able to see how those two mesh together. Then also you add in the Brandon Ingram aspect of that. This is just looking like the Raptors we know and love. It's they're typically a team that's running a lot of big wings. I mean, Coop just fit right into the mold if this is the case. And I think that their future would look really, really bright with Coop being on the team. All right, now moving on to the next team, my beloved Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets are choosing at the 6th best odds. The 6th best odds has won the lottery 3 times in the lottery history. The most recent being 2006, when the Milwaukee Bucks selected Andrew Bogut. And then you have in 1988, Purvis Ellis. And then in 1986, you have Brad Daughtry, who was selected by the Cleveland Cavaliers. At this point, I just said it, my beloved Brooklyn Nets, but I've mentioned my future index is very objective, and it's going to show in the score that I've chosen for the Brooklyn Nets is I got the Nets as a D+ for the future. Although they have a bevy of picks coming up, it's the roster that you look at, and then you look at the front office that just still gives you worries at this moment. It's not the worst, it's not the best. So it's a little shaky about how I feel about the front office in a completely objective standpoint is why they got the score that I gave them. What a D+. When you look at the picks, I mean, the Nets have 11. I'm going to say that one more time. The Nets have 11 first-round picks in the next 5 years. And then they have 11 second-round picks in the next 5 years. This bodes well for any team looking to rebuild. And then if you get to hit the lottery and get that special player like a Cooper Flagg, that just jump starts it for you. So when I look at the short term for this team, what Coop means for them, in this moment, it's not about Coop. but I think it's absolutely nothing, or it's a surprise play-in. I said this earlier with a team like the Trailblazers. The bright side of their team was their coaching. The Nets' bright side is their coaching. Jordi Fernandez, I am convinced Jordi Fernandez could get a group of eighth graders together and have them competing. That is how much I believe in him as a coach at this point. And, when you look at the roster that he rolled out this year and what they were able to do and achieve, I mean, the Nets found a bunch of guys that were reclamation projects. And I'm sorry to say it like that. It's no way to disrespect the players that were on the team, but there was a lot of guys that, they bought low on, and they took a shot at it and to see what this would look like. So when you think of that and you see what they were able to do, playing into what the expectation was, and then buying in and beating that expectation, they were a team that was projected to win just 14, 15 games at the beginning of the season. And then they won 10 additional games due to his coaching. This would be helpful for a guy like Coop in the short term for his development. Now to the positive is the long term for this team. The sky is the limit for this team. Out of all the teams I've mentioned in this video, the Nets have the most first overall picks in the next 5 years. This gives the Nets the complete freedom to construct a team that is built around Coop. You have around $63 million, I believe, at this point in cap space for this year heading into the offseason. And then you have the potential to get up to like 70 mil if they decline all their team options. And then you keep that in mind, and then you go even further with that is in 2 years, they'll only have one contract commitment to Nick Claxton. This level of freedom to build is like everything YouTube, my GM, 2K players would wish for. This is their heaven right here. With not much to desire from this roster in my mind personally. Yes, there's bright spots in it, right? The Cam Thomas, the Drew Timmies of it. There's good stories to talk about, but there's no long-term commitment that you have to make here. So that in mind, building around Coop would be the first and foremost point for this team. So hopefully my beloved team gets that shot. Moving on to the Philadelphia 76ers. They have the fifth best odds at selecting the number one pick. In this position, the fifth best odds has won 5 times in lottery history. As most recent as 2010, when the Washington Wizards selected John Wall, and other notable picks here was 2002, 2002, the Houston Rockets selected Yao Ming at this pick. And then in 1991, the Charlotte Hornets selected Larry Johnson. The Philadelphia 76ers have a 10.5% chance at winning the draft. Again, proof to why this future index has been objective as hell is I am going to be negative as hell to the Sixers because there is no reason in my mind that they're right here. But my future index gives them an A. Although their pick situation isn't the best, it isn't the worst either. They're middle of the pack. They have an average, a slightly under average amount of picks in the next 5 years for first round picks, where they have only 4, and then they have 7 second round picks in the next 5 year. As I mentioned, this just bodes to tradable pieces. So that you have, although questionable things have been happening in the front office, still a competent front office, and the picks, you look at a team that truly is primed to bounce back. So in the short term, if Coop is selected by the Sixers in the short term, it's playoff contention, right? In my mind, the most undeserving team to select Coop in my mind, personally. I just think that it's egregious that they tanked in this position, right? Like, I don't care if it's injuries or not. There's no world where Joel Embiid, Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, even if they give you 50% of play from each one of them throughout the season, is worse than 25 other teams in the league. But I'll digress. If Coop is selected to this team, this will send them to the top of the East, but with an asterisk, right? Health is the biggest asterisk. They all need to stay healthy. And honestly, that's what scares me. It scares me for Coop too. That Sixers juju with picks that get selected and get hurt is just getting me scared for the team. But if they're healthy, this team is right up there with the Knicks, the Celtics, and Cavs, like right away. In the long term, although, like I mentioned, still a solid front office, a lot of questionable decisions recently, but they still seem pretty solid. The biggest problem is, what direction are they going to take long term if Coop is on the roster? It's scary because this feels like the same questions we were asking about the Ben Simmons experience, and I hate that we're having this conversation again. If it does become that, is the timeline, what does Daryl Morey say? Is the timeline centered around Coop from that point moving forward, or Embiid? If Embiid, I believe those picks need to be moved expeditiously. You know, you have to strengthen this bench for deeper playoff runs. You found a diamond in the rough by getting a guy like Quentin Grimes on this roster during the trade deadline, but you need to do a bunch more movement like that. So, yeah, you know, when I say that, I also have to mention, you know, the playoffs, like I said, is happening as we speak. And what has been the glaring storyline of this playoffs? It's just been that depth is king right now, and you need to have depth. So I say, if you're going to embrace a timeline that is fit around Embiid, you need to get competent players around them, even with Coop. If the timeline is built around Coop, then you need to find a way out of the Paul George contract. And low-key, it looks like you might even have to see if anybody will bite on the Embiid contract. That's a huge, you know, when you really think about it, that's huge, because if the Sixers doesn't commit to a contract extension that grows to over $60 million a year for Embiid for the foreseeable future, I think that it would be easy to make that trade. But, you know, when a guy is taking up a sizable chunk of the cap for the team and you decide to pick him up, I just don't know in a world. I really doubt there is a world where there will be a lot of suitors. So it's like an in-between situation looking at them long term. It would be a good problems to have, but we've seen the Sixers in a good problem to have, and we've seen how they've squandered it before. So it makes me scared long term for Coop more than thinking about anyone on the team if that happens. Now we move on to New Orleans, the last team in this group. New Orleans have the fourth best odds in this lottery. Teams with the fourth best odds have won the lottery 3 times in the lottery's history. The most notables being 2018, Anthony Davis being selected by the New Orleans Pelicans, and in 1987, when the San Antonio Spurs selected David Robinson. New Orleans have 12.5% chance of winning the first pick this year. New Orleans got a decent future index, right? I gave them a score of a B-. A lot of that is predicated on they're shoring up their front office. It's looking a lot. They're middle of the pack, not bad, not great, but bodes well when you bring in a guy like Joe Dumars to be the head man of your front office. So with that in mind, you look at that. You look at they don't have the most favorable pick situation, but they have a solid roster when you're looking at some of the pieces that are on this roster. Their pick situation is they have 6 first-round picks in the next 5 years. That's above average, right? But they only have 1 second-round pick in the next 5 years. So in the short term, ultimately, this makes them a playoff contender in my mind. This would probably be one of the most exciting duos in the league. I think that it would be enough to have teams, the front office, the fans, very excited in this team, but not a serious contender. It would just be a very decent roster, but nothing to be desired, right? Now, long term, as I mentioned, you have Joe Dumars now leading this organization. I have the most faith that with him at the helm, they'll be able to fare better, right? But what does scares me is, although I have faith in what this team will become, but I feel that the future doesn't have Zion included in it. Although if Zion, I assume, gets moved, they'll be able to net. And I mean, although if they move Zion, and this is the scariest part, I assume that if they move Zion, they're not.
Seems like we lost audio somewhere here, but no problem. I'm going to pick it back up from where we left off. I just don't know if what you're going to get for sending Zion out is going to amass a bunch of future assets. So I don't see the reason why, personally, you would do it. I personally would just continue with this experiment with the both of them, see where this leads the team, and then ultimately see how far you could go with it. I just wouldn't be too confident long-term in what they will display to have both of those stars in New Orleans. So personally, I would be a little fearful of the idea of this situation as well too. But with Coop, I mean, you got to give him the time to change that thought process in your mind. Now, starting off with the big 3 of the draft lottery picks that are left, the next team is the Charlotte Hornets, who will be selecting with the third best odds. The third best odds position team has won the lottery 9 times in the lottery's history. The most notable being 2 guys selected by San Antonio with their nearly identical records in those respective years is 1997 Tim Duncan and 2023 Victor Wembanyama. Other notable picks, the first ever draft lottery, 1985, the New York Knicks selected Patrick Ewing, and 2009, Blake Griffin.
My future index is a D for these guys. When you look at Charlotte's front office, it's not the best. When you look at the roster, it's not the best either. You have a favorable pick collection, but when you look at this team and what they've been throughout their existence, they're always choosing in the lottery. So I don't think that picks is the only thing you look at for the future with a team like this. So this is why they got a D in my mind. When you look at Coop and what he would mean to Charlotte in this way for the short term, I think that puts them in contention for play-ins, right? My biggest fear, if he is selected by Charlotte, is, and it's always been my fear with any player, any young player that gets selected by Charlotte, is they're a very unserious organization. And I hate to say that, but, you know, being a team that is perennially in this situation, I fear what that does for a blossoming player like Coop. Obviously, he's right down the road. He was in Durham this past fall. Moving over west to Charlotte wouldn't be too bad for him. But, I mean, I just don't know if that bodes well, like that environment. But when you look at if he's healthy, the guy has not found his way to be healthy that often in the league. When you look at LaMelo and then you look at him, just them alone gets you into the play in my mind. I also like the hiring of Charles Lee last year. You know, getting a guy that has the Celtics pedigree into that first chair on the floor it seems like a movement in the right direction. The way how they started last season too started to feel like we were looking at a renaissance in Charlotte for a second, and then they regressed back into the team that we've known them to be the last couple of years, sadly. But adding guys like over this time, like adding guys that have respect around the league, like a Josh Green, like a Grant Williams, like a Trey Mann, is all pieces that makes me feel like they're heading in the right direction. But again, the unseriousness of how this organization has been run the last couple of years still scares me. So in the long term, you look at they have a surplus of picks, which could help with pairing them with more competent players, but they have to do some stuff like they have to move off of guys like Mark Williams. You clearly see his mind's still in Los Angeles. Yeah, you need to move off of guys like that. And anyone that seems like, for lack of a better word, malcontents in that way, like that don't bode well for your future, you got to move off of them and try to get more of a serious organization situation here. Now, moving on to the team with the second best odds, the Washington Wizards. Teams with the second best odds have won the lottery 4 times in the lottery's history, most notably being 1992, Shaq being selected by the Orlando Magic. And in 1996, the Philadelphia Sixers selected Allen Iverson. And then in recent history, back-to-back years in 2021 and 2022, in the respective years, the Pistons selected Cade Cunningham and the Magic selected Paolo Banchero. So you look at this odds, like I said, is similar to number 3. Is not similar, is exactly the same as number 3. It is 14% odd. This team has a little bit better of a score than Charlotte, and I gave them a C+. I like where this front office is heading. It's still not great, but I like where it's heading. I like the picks collections that they have. And then you look at the roster, full of young players that you could build around and grow and develop. That's what got me to the C+ grade that I gave them. So then you look at the short term, what Coop means for this team. A very fun play-in eligible team in my mind. This is a team I actually love a lot for Coop. They have a very similar timeline to where he is as a player that would allow him to take time to develop, right, and not rush any of the steps, and gives the organization times also to add pieces around him and grow slowly and steadily, right? The Wizards, the team has seemed to respond very well to Brian Keefe being implemented as the coach with his player development background. He was actually a part of the Nets G League, the Long Island Nets, a few years back here, and helping develop guys on that side of the things. So when you look at that, I think that would be huge for Coop to be given time to fail and learn from it. And then you look at the long-term effects of this is the Wizards have a boatload of picks as well. The long-term effects of that is, again, as I mentioned, they get to be slow and steady, maybe surprise some people, but also build in the proper ways. They can find a good mix of trading for pieces that moves them forward, but doesn't have to handicap them. And also they get to draft where they're at if they're steadily improving to fill out the roster. So this is quickly starting to become a really good situation in my mind moving forward. Now, lastly, the Utah Jazz with the best odds at selecting Cooper Flagg in the 2025 NBA draft. The team with the best odds to win the lottery has won the lottery 8 times in the lottery's history. Most notably, 2003. It's easy to know who this is. LeBron James being selected by the Cleveland Cavaliers. In 2004, back-to-back years, the Orlando Magic selected Dwight Howard, and in 2015, the Minnesota Timberwolves selected Karl Anthony Towns. Again, as I mentioned, evened out odds here, 14%. You look at Utah, I gave them a future index score of a B. you love their front office. The pick selection or collection is pretty decent. And then you love some of the pieces that they have on this roster moving forward. So when you look at what they have in the next upcoming years on the picks, you have 7 first-round picks in the next 5 years. Then you have 4 second-round picks in the next 5 years. That gives you a lot to work with and a lot of flexibility with what you're going to potentially do moving forward. Now, for the short term, what this means for the team, I don't think it does much for the team right away, but I believe it may vie for like a play-in spot, maybe. But with the supporting cast that they have on this team with players like Sexton, Markkanen, Clarkson, and then a ton of young players like Kessler, Keontae George, Kyle Filipowski, Isaiah Collier, like you have a lot to work with, and I could see them like very much vying for a play-in spot as soon as next year. Now, long term, I mean, that's where their leverage lives, right? They have picks flexibility out the wazoo to either, decide to build around their draft or move some of these picks to get more win now guys, But either way, I think I have the utmost trust in this front office that they'll make the right decision when it comes to it. And because of that, that is why they got to be. So that is the end of all of the 13 teams that have a shot at selecting Cooper Flagg in this draft.
This is future me again. It looks like we lost audio here as well, but it is the end of this glorious video. Thank you guys for watching all the way through. I enjoy dissecting each one of these teams, seeing what Coop would mean to them. And, for every fan of these 13 teams that are vying for the opportunity for that first pick in this lottery, best of luck. And hopefully on Tuesday, when I put out a recap about the lottery, we can talk about and rejoice about why your team won the draft. Peace. If you enjoy content like the one you just saw, feel free to like and subscribe. YouTube also told me you might like some content like this one right here. I don't know. It told me you like it. Hey, watch it or not. It's your choice.